Hello, fellow Agilists. Today I would like to talk with you about the Agile Manifesto, specifically the Agile Values. And even though the manifesto is almost 2 decades old, there's still quite a bit of contention, both in social media and on various blogs, as to whether the values are actually a good idea or not, or whether they make sense in our organization. Today I would like to give you my opinion on how those values could be interpreted and how you could make sense of them. This is the original manifesto, the way it was written on agilemanifesto.org. Note the first sentence, which is very often forgotten, which is we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. So if you're not finding better ways, then maybe you're missing the essence of what this is really all about. It's really about getting better and finding better ways. And then we have this statement, which is the conclusion below the four values. I preempt it now. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. Consider the following situation. If you have food and drink, now a normal balanced diet would of course consist of both food and drink. There's no contention that you need both of them in order to be healthy. But if you have to make an either-or choice, you can go for a few days without food. It won't really hurt you very much. But if you go for more than a few days without drink, you will have severe health issues. So if you need to make a tough choice, then it might be better to forgo the food in favor of some drink. And this is the basis of what the Agile values are all about. We should not make exclusive either-or situations once for all, because if we make those calls once for all, we would be like in this image, we would be starving without food. We cannot survive. And it's the same with the Agile values. So let's take a look at the first value, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Well, I do remember when I was still pretty new to consulting, I was consulting for a major corporation, and one of the executive managers sent out a memo where he bemoaned the amount of meetings in the organization. And he said if everybody would just follow the process, we would have the need for a lot fewer meetings and we would be much more efficient. Yes, processes are pretty good, but you can't pull everything into a process. Otherwise, your processes will become so bloated that essentially nobody remembers what the process is like. Imagine you have a problem with a certain instruction given to you by your manager. What is the formal process? Well, I don't know what in your organization the formal process would be, but why not just walk over to their desk and ask them, what do you mean with this? It should be clarified within a few minutes, and a lot of misunderstandings could be avoided this way. And there are a lot of things in human interaction that are much easier to explain in a simple face-to-face conversation than to mint into a process in a way that cannot be misunderstood. So this is all about, well, if I'm doubtful about what the situation is, maybe I should not follow the process down to the letter, but I should interact with the people around me and ask them, what is the intent behind this? What is this thing that I'm supposed to be doing? Then we get to the second value. This one is highly contentious, working software over comprehensive documentation. How often have I heard organizations say that, but we need documentation? Yes, you need documentation. What I like to state here is that if you have the choice, you either get documentation for a software that doesn't exist, or you get a piece of software and the documentation is not comprehensive. That doesn't mean that there's no documentation, but that there's just basic documentation. Which of the circumstances would you prefer for the time being? Most probably you would like to have some usable software and developers are working in the background to provide the documentation that isn't there while you're already using the software. Another thing that I would like to mention in this context is, when was the last time you read the instruction manual for your smartphone? Probably never. Probably you don't even know that there is one, and even if you've never read it front to back. And such is most documentation. You would rather prefer a product that is so intuitive that it does not require much documentation over a product that is so complex that without documentation you can't work it. How about technical documentation in this context? Yes, you need technical documentation. But what is better than very comprehensive technical documentation is self-explanatory code and well-structured code that does not require so much documentation. A few lightweight architecture diagrams, some context, some tests which also document not just what the software does, but maybe also in the comments why it does it. That's already pretty good documentation. And whatever other documentation you need, of course you can add it. There is nothing in the Agile Manifesto that says do not write documentation. But if you have documentation, think about, is it correct? Do people actually read it? Is it up to date? Do people follow what the documentation say? And do they trust in the documentation? If those things are not given, then maybe you don't benefit so much from your documentation. And the first thing you might want to be looking at is, why is this the case and how can we simplify this? The next value is customer collaboration of contract negotiation. Now this one is pretty funny because I got criticized pretty heavily, even in the Scrum community, for saying that yes, of course we need contracts even in an agile setting. You can't work without contracts. And you need even some contracts, like working agreements could also be considered a contract because they provide clarity to all parties as to what is required. There is no contention that we need a contract, but let me get back to a very nice statement that a CDO once told me. He said, by the time that you're pulling out a contract, your business relationship is basically over already. Because if you have a good customer relationship, you don't really need the contract, because you're collaborating, you're enjoying the mutual communication, and you will always find a solution how to get things to work. So you don't need to invest into complex contracts and argue about every comma and semicolon in there if you have a collaborative relationship with your customer, which of course you would prefer to have much rather than a customer who will beat you with a contract and say you didn't do what you were supposed to do. This is the final value, responding to change over following a plan. Do we plan in an agile setting? Of course we do. Even Scrum has a sprint planning as a standard event, and without a plan, how do we know where we're going and why we should be going there? But it's not about drafting up an intricate, detailed plan under the hopes that we can follow it as an instruction manual from A to Z and we will get where we wanted to get. Something always comes up. We don't know what that something is, but as soon as something comes up, we need to say that, okay, we're going to deal with it, we're flexible, we'll find a way, we'll make it work, and in the end, we will reach our goal. That is much more important than whatever steps we had planned before. So it's not about not having a plan, it's about being flexible to whatever happens when we get a plan. I hope that you like this small take on the Agile values, and maybe if you still have some contention about them, feel free to comment below. Thank you.